Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 3 of Set the Westworld on Fire. This is our weekly podcast where we discuss the ins and outs of HBO's new TV show Westworld, episode by episode. This week's episode was called The Stray. Me and Cy, we're going to get right into it.
Let's do it, Ryan.
So we'll do a little overview of what happened in this week's episode, where some of these storylines have progressed. There's still a lot of malfunctioning going on with the hosts, a lot of errors, Dolores in particular, but also Maeve, who I'm very surprised is still in service. It also seems to still be getting triggered with certain events to have flashbacks and things like that. Although,
it's a bug they cannot shake, Ryan.
That's true, yeah. They cannot get rid of this bug. There's no insecticide that will eliminate this bug.
Figuratively and literally.
Maeve doesn't play a huge role in this particular episode, but Dolores certainly does. And her, again, she has a couple of sessions with Bernard. In one particular session, he has her read a passage from Alice in Wonderland, which, you know, kind of goes back and forth with, like, the questions of, are you real, or what's real, and who are you, and the things that Dolores is kind of dealing with her memory malfunctions and phased in and out of memories and things like that.
At that same time, Ryan, we also learn a little bit about Bernard's backstory as well.
Yes, and I will get to that. And there's a particular instance, and this keeps coming up, with Bernard asking Dolores, have you told anyone about what's going on? And her response is, you told me not to. Not specifically, no, I haven't. I don't know if that's going to come back and be kind of like a detail that Bernard may be overlooking.
Well, this felt more like an emotional response than just a cold, calculated response that I think that we would be used to getting with the hosts. Don't you agree, Ryan?
Yeah, it seems to be a very choice selection of words, not necessarily just a direct, like, affirmative or negative or something like that. And she also, back in, not in the, in the real world, the Westworld part of it, the gun that she found in the previous episode seems to be giving her flashbacks of the Man in Black. And that's going to come back a little bit later in the story. So Ford and Bernard also have a lengthy conversation about Arnold, who turns out to be a early partner of Ford that helped build the robots and the theme park. But Ford alludes to him having some sort of accident, not going into too much details about that, but he was kind of scrubbed from the history books. Arnold was especially important because he tried to build actual real consciousness into the hosts, which, you know, Ford kind of went against because it kind of led to something that they didn't want, which was making the hosts feel almost like, I guess the goal would be to almost feel like the main characters versus the guests that would feel like they were the ones in power and actually controlling the story. And that seems to be some of the code that's resurfacing in these malfunctions. The specific case was during the first episode, one of the bandits kind of flipped out in the center of town and started killing everybody, and he kept talking to somebody named Arnold, which nobody knew who that was until, you know, Ford and Bernard had a private conversation. This isn't something that all of the employees know about Arnold. So one interesting tidbit that we found out about Bernard is that, for one, he seems like he may have a wife, in addition to having the affair with Teresa. So there may be something going on there. I wasn't sure if it was still an ongoing marriage, or whether or not it was they were divorced and they were just still having conversations. They had a child Charlie that died of some medical illness early on, and Bernard seems to be carrying this with him throughout these conversations with Dolores and Ford, and I guess we'll see where that goes specifically.
It's interesting on a few levels, Brian, because I never really pictured Bernard having a family or a son just because of how intertwined he is with his work. But maybe this gives us an explanation as to why he is, because it's not unusual to hear someone dealing through loss by attempting to throw themselves into their own work.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, that could be a backstory for Bernard. But one of the things that's really interesting, Ryan, is this relationship that Ford and Bernard have, because Ford seems to trust Bernard more than any other of his employees that we've seen thus far.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just kind of curious why. Is it because Ford sees himself in Bernard, or vice versa? Is Bernard perhaps the most capable out of all of them, or does Ford see Bernard as the most loyal to him, or as just a lowly subject, despite his intellectual?
It could also go down the road of like a father-son kind of thing, because Bernard may be at the age, if Ford had a son when he was younger, they'd be the right age. So it could be something like that too. Like Ford just needs to put his trust into somebody, and being in isolation like he has been, just needs to get some of that stuff off his chest.
Maybe the same could be said for Bernard too, Ryan. Maybe it's because if he's experienced the loss that they're alluding to in the show, maybe he needs to put a trust in something, and he has to believe in his work, hence believe in the creator.
So Bernard and Dolores' story kind of wrap up with Bernard having another meeting with Dolores, in which he pretty much tells her he's not going to do anything about her malfunctions and the flashbacks she's having. He's just going to let it kind of play its course, which is kind of a surprising free reign he's giving her in terms of, what's going on and everything like that.
It's sort of similar, Ryan, to alluding back to Alice in Wonderland. How far is Bernard letting Dolores go through the rabbit hole?
Yeah.
Now, I know I'm sounding a little bit like Morpheus from The Matrix, but this is the closest, this is the closest analogy that I can give for what Bernard is doing.
And he's watching it through the looking glass, kind of seeing how it plays out on a bigger scale.
Exactly. And because these hosts are so closely monitored, it's given life. And it's interesting because Bernard sees Dolores as a science experiment, which for all intents and purposes, it's what she is.
Mm-hmm.
But still, he also seems to have some sort of emotional attachment, being that Dolores is the oldest model out of all of this. So it's definitely an interesting part that the most valuable, or at least the most antiquated subject, is the one that they're studying.
Yeah, we'll see how that pans out. It was just a surprising turn for Bernard. And so what actually ends up happening here is Dolores kind of goes back into her routine. However, when she goes back to her ranch, where, usually there's this scene where bandits attack her family, and Teddy is usually with her, and we'll talk about Teddy in a little bit, but Teddy is not with her on this particular night, and she attempts to kind of thwart the bandits on her own. This is the same scene we saw at the beginning of the first episode. And what ended up happening was the lead bandit ends up taking her into the hay shed that the man in black took her to in the very first episode. And she has a little bit of a flashback where that bandit is transposed with the man in black and vice versa. And she ends up killing this bandit. She has the gun that we've been seeing for these past 2 episodes, and she shoots him. And this is particularly significant because earlier in that episode, Teddy and her were attempting to, Teddy was attempting to train Dolores how to shoot a gun to protect herself from the bandits, and she kind of couldn't pull the trigger on the gun. She said she couldn't do it, which is whether or not she couldn't from a like hesitation moral standpoint, or she simply wasn't programmed to be able to do it. I'm not sure about that, but regardless, at the end of this episode, she was able to pull the trigger on that gun. So something happened between that scene with Teddy earlier and this scene where they were in the hay shed. And so she gets out, actually, and tries to escape, but one of the other bandits shoots her. But then there's this weird time lapse where it kind of rewinds time, where she isn't shot, and she ends up escaping. So there's a lot of memory overlaps and flashbacks and things going on with Dolores. That
not to mention overcoming her programming, Ryan, because initially it seemed like a programming thing that didn't allow her to shoot. This time she's now evolved where she's able to defend herself. She's no longer this little girl on the prairie.
Right, she's not she's not completely defenseless. She doesn't need Teddy with her all the time in order to protect her. Which Teddy didn't provide too much protection, but at least he tried. So she escapes on a horse and actually winds up stumbling upon William's camp in the middle of the wilderness there, with along with his now we know that is his soon-to-be brother-in-law, Logan.
Oh, I thought it was already her brother. His Logan was already William's brother-in-law, Ryan, or at least he used to be. It sounds to me like he's already married and might be going through a divorce or something like that. Maybe I'm mistaken, but that seems to be.
That's not what I took. That's not what I took that conversation to indicate. He dropped a little bit of a tidbit, and I believe it was soon to be, but maybe I misheard that. Either way, that's their relationship. Last episode we were questioning Logan and William's relationship. Exactly what it was, and it turns out that there's some sort of brother-in-law situation going on there.
Right.
So Dolores stumbles upon their camp, all malfunctioning and weird, and kind of passes out, and that's kind of where the episode ends. So there's definitely going to be, which we predicted last episode, some storyline with William and Dolores. How that goes, we'll see how that pans out later on in the following episodes. So I just want to quickly touch upon Teddy's story here. So Teddy gets his story kind of rewritten a little bit here. He is actually playing a pretty big role in Ford's new narrative. He's kind of the hero figure to the villain, which is Wyatt, who appears to be some sort of rogue, well, maybe not, well, now I guess you'd call him rogue Confederate soldier who has some sort of god complex where he's murdered and starts a cult, and
similar to General Kurtz from Apocalypse Now, Ryan.
That seems to be the main storyline here, Heart of Darkness kind of narrative here, where Wyatt is kind of set up in the outskirts of Westworld, and he's built a cult around him, and Teddy and the sheriff and a couple of men and some guests too attempt to go after Wyatt, but end up getting ambushed, and of course Teddy's killed again. And that's kind of where
his bullets have no effect on any of Wyatt's group, Ryan, if I recall correctly.
I watched it the second time, and there were definitely some of those guys that were falling, but not like in particular that one scene where he's surrounded and he kind of quick draws on him. That scene in particular, none of them fell, and I'm just wondering. My initial instinct was that maybe those are guests dressed up, and they may not be hosts. So that's why Teddy's bullets weren't having an effect on them. Or maybe there's some programming in the story or the narrative that's preventing that from happening. I'm not sure. So we'll probably figure out what's going on there a little bit next episode. And then the final storyline has Stubbs and Elsie going out into the outskirts of Westworld to go after a stray host that is breaking away and kind of causing problems with some of the narratives that he's involved in. So there's a couple of weird things going on there, like this host is carving constellations into wood figurines, which haven't really figured out exactly what significance that has yet. But they end up finding him trapped in a crevice in the ground, and as Stubbs is trying to retrieve him out of there, this host wakes up from his sleep cycle, much like Maeve did in the previous episode, and kind of freaks out. And it looks like he actually does attack Stubbs and knocks him out, sort of. And then looks like he's going to attack and kill Elsie with a rock, but ends up smashing himself in the head.
Yeah. What was with that? What was with that, Ryan? It's interesting because he didn't kill he didn't. Let me rephrase that. Even though he was able to hurt Stubbs, he somehow was prevented from hurting Elsie, and I'm wondering if it was his programming that the hosts do not kill the guests, which is what he would have probably perceived Elsie as. Yeah. And then his old programming probably prevented him and causing the malfunction. That's just me, but that seemed to be that's what I took out of that whole incident.
Yeah, that was a weird series of events. Like, you knew that probably there was something going to happen there because of the way it was set up, like very foreboding kind of situation. It was dark, it was at night, and their storyline had been leading up to this confrontation with this stray robot. But like the fact that he didn't kill Stubbs, and the fact that the host didn't end up, dropping the rock on Elsie, was interesting. It's like you said, maybe there is something in the program that's preventing him from doing that, even though there's maybe something else in the program that's making him want to. I don't know. I guess we'll find out what happens with their story in the next episode, but that's where that particular thread ended. So,
it is.
This was a pretty good episode. I still think my favorite episode was the second episode, but this one was definitely great in its own terms. There's definitely some interesting new threads being woven in. One thing was conspicuously absent was the Man in Black. He didn't have any new narrative movements in this particular episode. He was featured in flashbacks and weird visions and things like that, but he didn't actually have any new scenes. So I wonder what he's up to.
Ryan, one thing that got me thinking, and this is a possible conspiracy theory, but do you think that the Man in Black could really be the Arnold that Ford and Bernard were talking about? Do you think that this could allude to a theory that I talked about to you a while ago and may have even discussed on the show, that the Man in Black was really is actually Arnold, who may have accidentally died in Westworld, and his consciousness is the one that's still alluding into the Westworld as we speak. Do you think that this is a possibility?
Yeah, that's certainly possible. The only thing is, like, I don't understand why, he's allowed to have free reign if that's the case,
Maybe it's because, maybe it's alluded to this, Ryan. Someone died in Westworld due to an accident. They kept it secret and off the records because if that was ever discovered, Westworld may never have opened and there would have been torn up in litigation for years alone. So I wonder if that's the reason why he would have free reign.
Maybe. So are you suggesting that the Man in Black is in fact Arnold, or do you think it's just his consciousness within something else?
I think it could be his consciousness within something else, But again, Ryan, I mean, I think that could work. I think that could work both ways.
Hmm.
But again, I mean, the purpose of setting the Westworld on fire is to make these assumptions and guesses,
Yeah.
and then continue to watch for the for the things that need to be further explained.
Yeah, that's
But
certainly
another thing
a valid theory to go down, because I can't think of anything specifically that debunks that. So there was one, I just want to bring this up. We didn't bring it up, but I did read it on the internet. There was a theory that William was actually a young man in black, and that William's scenes were actually taking place in the past. And I didn't believe that, because, it was clearly taking place in the present, because all of the hosts were modern and functioning like they do in the modern day, versus, we already saw with Ford how those old hosts acted, very stilted and not very lifelike at all. So I didn't think that was anything, and that was, of course, totally disproven in this episode with Dolores stumbling onto William's camp. So those timelines have collided. So William is certainly not the man in black.
No, he's not the man in black, Ryan. And again, even our theories can't really be proven yet, even though they can't be disproven. I personally think that theory, Ryan, doesn't strike me as being accurate, because I think there would need to be a lot of factors. William, when he was coming here, was the very reluctant party compared to his brother-in-law Logan, who seemed to be a seasoned veteran. I think something like that you would have to take chance into probability, and honestly, I just think they would have too much riding on that for William to be this prodigal son of sorts.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring it up as a possible theory that was floating around, which I believe is definitely, for my money, not only could it not have happened in the last episode, but has been pretty much debunked in this one.
Right. I mean, it's an interesting theory. I will give it credit for that. But something else I want to talk about this episode, this seems to be it seems to continue the recurring theme of Westworld regarding choice for the host. Like, take a look at Teddy. He was programmed for the story to fall in love with Dolores and be his savior. Yet, because of the programming, he doesn't run away with Dolores and go away. He follows his programming to go on this doomed hunt for Wyatt, and ends up getting killed. Poor James Marsden, of course. We should really start calling him Nordberg. We should start calling him Nordberg, because of all the times he keeps getting his ass kicked, or in this case, keeps getting a bullet to his name. But you just gotta love the punching bag, Ryan.
Yeah.
It's a vital part. But
he's definitely taken to his new storyline without much hesitation, which seems to indicate that he has no symptoms thus far of malfunction or anything like that.
Right. You have to wonder, Brian, with all these androids, how would other famous androids from like movie and TV worlds view this? How would Data from Star Trek view this, or the replicants from Blade Runner?
Very precisely.
Or how would even David from or any of the androids from the Alien series view this?
Yeah.
I mean, they're all very different, but you have to wonder if you I mean, even this episode, it was a random thought. I couldn't just help and think to myself, what would happen if we introduced Data to this?
Data would be the one that would be watching this on the Enterprise, and maybe reproducing it on the holodeck.
Yes, but of course, I think if Data did that, he would be going there and would try to give them his advice to the host and to the humans, stating that how all of this is illogical, stating that you are just actors. You are really just actors in a game. Yep. This whole theory is very illogical, and this is not productive for human life.
Yeah. So before we wrap this up, I just want to throw out there a really crazy theory. I just want to get it on the record. I'm not really 100% behind this, but I had this weird feeling, specifically with the conversation between Bernard and Ford, that I'm not sure if it's just Bernard, or maybe it may be more than that, but right now, I think Bernard is a host.
if he was a host, though, Ryan, he would be the. Well, here's the thing. If he was a host, he would be the most technologically advanced host.
That's what I'm talking
that we
about.
would
Yeah.
see.
So,
Because, I mean,
let me put together a little bit of why I was thinking this, and it was specifically his son, the introduction of that son storyline. So throughout the whole series so far, there's this idea that the hosts are, at their core, their backstory.
Uh-huh.
And that's discussed specifically in this episode with Elsie talking to Stubbs when they find those carved figurines. So I'm thinking that Charlie, Bernard's son who's passed away, is his backstory, and that's where we're building. That's where he's building his character off of.
Yep.
So there's just something very, I don't know. I was picking up in that conversation between Ford and Bernard that's the first time I had ever thought about it as being a possibility. And after that conversation, I was just like, man, that could actually be true. And
but to get that, Ryan, Bernard is somebody who seems to feel emotion, even though he's not the most. I mean, keep in mind that he's not the most passionate human here in terms of, some of the other characters. Or human or assumed human characters here with their ideas and their thoughts on how Westworld should operate. Not to mention, how would he be able to talk with his ex-wife? How would Teresa, assuming she's human, know that no, because Bernard is having an affair with this woman? And then, but again, I could see how some things make sense because Bernard is. Let's assume he's human, or let's continue with my assumption that he is human. Bernard was probably the most likable or the most morally redeemable out of all the humans, or at least the human you had the least amount of questions about regarding their moral character. What I'm getting to is I could see how you'd make that theory because of how likable, because what's a recurring trait here is that the hosts are much more likable than the guests and the other the human administration of Westworld. And that's including Robert Ford, Teresa, Elsie, Stubbs. So I could see how that can make sense, but I still am not convinced. I'd have to see more. But I like that prediction, though, Ryan.
Well, I'd like you to maybe rewatch this episode if you can, or watch future episodes and come up with one specific piece of evidence that disproves that Bernard isn't a host. Because I thought about it after I came up with that, and I can't think of one instance where there's one thing that was like, oh yeah, he can't be a host because of this one thing. Because like with the affair with Teresa, the hosts are designed to be imperceptible from humans. The whole conversation with his either his wife, his ex-wife, or whatever. I mean, that was all done on a computer. That could be all fake.
True, but that's one of the only things that I could see that would have to be very elaborate to disprove.
Yeah,
but again, I think not out of the question.
Yeah, I think that's like, Ford built Bernard, and Ford may be the only one that knows.
No, I would agree with that. That I could easily see that he would be the only one because there's no way the other human characters would report to him if they knew he was a replicant.
All right, so I guess that wraps up this particular episode. We'll be back next week with whatever Westworld has to offer. I had a flat tire on the way home from work today, and that's something you wouldn't have to deal with in Westworld.
No, it wouldn't, Ryan. And again, but then again, you also would have to learn how to ride a horse, and that's
true.
A pain in the ass, literally. Not to mention, back then they also didn't have vaccinations, so there's still the risk of smallpox, and you also have to realize that you can't mix. You also have to realize the drinks are not served cold in Westworld, so you're gonna have to drink that whiskey warm.
I guess I'll take a flat tire over smallpox.
I guess so. For you folks at home, it's always important to have either AAA or know how to change a tire.
Yep.
So let's make a note to that.
All right. If you have any questions, comments, if you have any theories that you want to share with us, don't be afraid to get in those comments and let us know what you think. Until next time, we'll see you in Westworld. Yeehaw!
Yippee-ki-yay!
Woo! Get along, little doggy.